Hi everyone, hope you're doing well and welcome to Spill the Beans. My name's Duncan Goldie. My guest this week is Rohit Bhatia, who is based over in the States and works for a company called Grand VCP. Grand VCP are a venture capital business that invest in early stage, normally Series A businesses that obviously require investment. Fairly straightforward. However, what's not straightforward is obviously navigating the world of digital healthcare, and Rohit talks me through, I suppose, how each of those businesses can go through securing or maximizing their chances of securing an initial round of investment, and kind of what they look for in terms of positioning yourself to sort of scale your product and how they can assist and everything like that. So it's really interesting and actually a really good insight into businesses that are scaling and potentially might have gone through quite a few unsuccessful rounds of funding. I really enjoyed speaking to him, and I hope you guys do too. Rohit, hi, thank you so much for taking the time to appear on the podcast today. So tell me, whereabouts in the world are you right now?
Yeah, thank you. I'm in the Boston area right now, quarantining with my parents actually, but generally speaking, I work out of Michigan in the US.
Perfect. What's the lockdown situation like at your parents' house? Have you got a good kind of setup away by
Yeah,
yourself? Or?
yeah, it's not too bad. Actually, Massachusetts right now has like one of the lowest transmission rates of COVID, so it's kind of calmed down here, which is pretty positive. So people are going outside wearing masks and stuff, but it's not too crazy now.
Yeah, that's good. Hopefully it continues going down that kind of route as well. Perfect. So obviously, came across Grand VCP, which is an investment business, and obviously this podcast I think would be super helpful for people that are thinking about potentially looking into some kind of investment, because obviously that they would come to you, I suppose. So maybe they will off the back of it. Who knows? But tell me kind of what led you down the path to get to where you are at the moment. What's your kind of career history been?
Yeah, so not too lengthy of a career so far. Graduated from Brown a few years ago, and studied political science there, and knew that I wanted to do something impact related, but didn't know kind of what that would look like. Um, Realized in school I also had a passion for investing after I joined this investment club on campus, and wanted to kind of combine my passion for impact investing and then entrepreneurship, and VC seemed like a way to do that. And I joined this program called Venture for America, which is kind of a program that tries to revitalize or help cities that don't really have like a really strong entrepreneurial ecosystem develop one. So I joined that program and got hooked up with a VC through that, and realized I really enjoy investing and helping entrepreneurs and learning alongside them. So it's kind of how I got where I am, and I'm really loving it and learning a lot.
Nice, perfect. And so, obviously it's fairly early days into your career, but how are you seeing the kind of overall investment landscape? Is there still a big appetite from the business with the impact of COVID and stuff like that, or is it slowed down slightly?
Yeah, there was definitely back in March, there was definitely like a significant slowdown. Like everyone was focusing more on portfolio and a lot less on new investments. But I think since then, like, I don't know, I think things have picked up significantly. I know for us, we invested in 3 companies during this time, which is a lot for us personally. So I think it's just like a shift of what kind of companies you're willing to invest in. It's kind of like the new metric is, can they, survive through a pandemic or not? Kind
Yeah.
of. And so it's just like a shift in the type of companies you're looking at. But a lot of people I think a lot of funds are still open to investing, albeit they're just a little more
Yeah,
cautious.
definitely. Well, it's obviously a good metric to look at whether the company can survive a pandemic, right? Because who knows how long this is going to be around for. So, specifically with digital health investments, there's probably other stuff that you look at, let alone, imagine, most digital health businesses are solving a solution, so they're ticking the box, hopefully that they're pandemic proof. But
Yeah.
what other things do you look at when evaluating a digital health business?
Yeah. I mean, generally, when we look at companies, whether it's digital health or like a developer tool software company, we're looking at some of the same criteria. But I mean, there's obviously specific nuances within healthcare as well. So I mean, most important is kind of market and whether they're playing in like $1 billion plus market and they're solving a pain point that's real. So we always try and talk to providers and patients and payers and really understand how they're looking at the world and if they agree with if they feel the pain of the problem that the startup is solving for. So that's kind of the first criteria. And then the other big one is team. So, does the team have a really strong sector specific background, or maybe it's a really strong tech background that kind of gives them the right to win in the space they're playing in? Or maybe they don't have any experience, which is fine too, but they've shown that they can do a lot with the limited resources that they've been given. And then that gives us confidence as investors that if we give them some funding and some coaching, that they'll be able to go a long way with that. And that was the case with one of the companies that we invested in called TimeDoc. So those founders were super young, but they were solving a pain point in chronic care management. And we saw early signs of their ability to execute, and we took a bet on the combination of this new market and this team that could really execute on a really important problem. And the last one, which I mean, not every company has, is traction. So are they growing really fast? So in VC, like 100% year-over-year growth is kind of what firms are looking for. Like if you have pilots, is there signs that they're converting to full-time contracts? And then do you have really strong engagement metrics for your users? So like a lot of, for digital health, right? Like a lot of digital health companies will have various studies showing that it works and it's effective, but getting people like, patients to actually use the platform that you're selling, or getting doctors to actually go into the platform and look at the data or make use of it is really, really hard. So I think engagement is a key metric, even if you don't have any revenue or real traction.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting that you mentioned, obviously the people within the business. I can imagine that a venture capital business would get all sorts of, applications and things like that. But it's interesting that you mentioned that you do go down to the end of it's not just the numbers, you do go down to the individual level, and you need to have belief in the people as well, which I think will give people quite a lot of confidence. When it comes down to confidence and stuff like that, I mean, what can people do prior to approaching you essentially, and what's going to sort of increase their chances of being able to achieve a successful result?
Yeah, I think, fundraising is all about communication, right? Like you're talking to, in a lot of cases, you're talking to investors who are really smart. But even if they're really smart, nobody understands your business or the problem you're solving for better than you. So you really have to explain the problem you're solving for and your solution like you're explaining it to a 5-year-old kind of. So really being able to communicate succinctly is really key. And the key thing you want to communicate is how significant the pain point that you're solving for is, and how your solution is not only different, but also like radically better than what's out there today. And in addition to just telling them, you want to have some sort of data to back up what you're saying. So whether that's, you've done like a bunch of interviews with potential like payers, for example, that show that, what you're saying is real, or you've shown some early sign of engagement in your platform. All of those things are good, because you don't just want to be, making claims. You want to be able to back them up with data.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess in terms of the approach that they're taking and all that kind of stuff, and the research they've done, I think a really helpful thing would be if they can learn from people's mistakes, or areas where it hasn't been successful as well. So you mentioned obviously one digital health business that you did invest in. I'm presuming there's a few that you haven't invested in as well. So in terms of the lessons that that you could learn within the digital health space, do you have any sort of examples around that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just first echo, like, yeah, I think self-awareness and ability to admit mistakes is probably the number one like best attribute of a founder, because you're going to go through so many different pivots, and it's a relationship that's going to last for 5 to 10 years. So that's so important. Like, we just looked at a company in the ADHD space, and this founder was really confident and smart, but they didn't really admit, they weren't willing to admit to us kind of the troubles that they were facing. And we knew that, like, the reason they were raising, and they had some issues in the past, but they weren't really willing to admit it. And that was like a big red flag for us. Whereas other companies, willingly kind of talk about the various pivots they've gone through and what they've learned from them. And that's always a really good sign. And then in terms of just like lessons that we've learned, I mean, there's a lot. So I guess for some context, like, we're not digital health experts, and we're kind of new to this space. So we're learning just as much as anyone else in this space. So I guess some of these lessons may be really intuitive to digital health specific investors, but maybe not as intuitive to us. So one of them is like just figuring out whether it's better to focus like really specifically on like a niche population, or kind of have a broader platform. So we've seen a lot of like broadly focused telehealth solutions, for example, and we looked at a few of them and just weren't super convinced they could, for example, compete with incumbents like Teladoc. And we ended up passing on those. But more recently, we've seen like really specific companies like focus like a GI focused virtual clinic, or an OCD focused digital health startup. And those I'm really intrigued by, because especially when like it's a really specific patient population and a really expensive problem, I think that's a really cool combination of things. And I think an example, like in the venture, like in terms of companies that have been successful or like venture backed and on the road to being successful, like one that comes to mind is Mindstrong. So they're trying to like passively monitor mental health status for complex patients with like bipolar and stuff, and then recommend interventions. And I think that's a space that's less saturated. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, you have like Talkspace and Calm, and just kind of the wellness space, which is like trying to serve everyone. I think it's way harder to win in that area right now. And then another like learning for us was how to think about tech-enabled services companies. So as we're like we're B2B software investors, and we like margins that are really high, so like 70% or higher. But a lot of digital health companies or healthcare IT companies have a services component, and that can drive down the margin a lot. And a lot of investors will pass because of that. And so I brought up TimeDoc before. So they have a really strong services component of their business. So they sell both the technology to enable chronic care management, as well as provide the nursing staff. So because of that part of the business, a lot of investors pass, but we realized that having the nursing staff as a value prop made it so much easier to sell the software. And without that, companies really didn't want to put in the trouble to even adopt chronic care management, because figuring out the nursing situation was so annoying. So that ended up being key. And then again, if you look kind of at successful companies, related to tech-enabled service like Viva and like Livongo, all of them have a services component that they use in order to make their customers really happy, and then land and expand within those customers. So I think there's a lot of examples of success with that. And then the other two kind of learnings are around defensibility and showing ROI. So like when we initially kind of got into digital health, we were like, there's no way we can successfully win in this space, because there's just so many players, and they all seem to be doing the same thing, right? There's 300,000 plus digital health apps. And so it's like, how could you possibly know which one is gonna be good or not? And then we realized like, common things that you might think would lead to defensibility maybe aren't that important. So for example, like having clinical evidence, can lead to defensibility. And like maybe having some complicated AI or something. But sometimes we've become more open-minded and thought about, simplicity and speed of execution, I think, are actually way more important and interesting. So with our most recent investment in the digital health space in a company called Manatee, which is an app that helps therapists integrate therapy for children into everyday life. This app is super simple, but it's really effective. And the founder has amazing execution ability, and she's been able to sell the product to huge health systems. So we really just bet on the market and the team, and realized that those two things are just as important or more important than kind of the complexities that may give a company defensibility.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, I know.
No, keep going. It's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing that you've got this process, and it's just, a lot of these businesses, when you think of like a startup within the healthcare space, there's so many of them. And obviously, you can look at a platform, like these telehealth things, and you can see how that can be applicable to so many different sectors within healthcare. But it's really interesting to hear, the more simple the solution and the more refined it is in terms of like its target customer or patient, that, essentially the more successful you're anticipating it will be. And I think that'll carry a lot of weight. I mean, in terms of I suppose, obviously from your perspective as an investor, you're going to want to see a return on your investment, kind of as quickly as possible. How do you do you provide sort of coaching to these businesses, and what does the kind of average return on investment look like for you within this space?
Yeah, so we're not necessarily, you don't necessarily want a return on investment as quick as possible, because often the quicker, or you don't necessarily want an exit as quick as possible, because if a company sells really fast after you invested, it's probably going to be for a lower amount, because they wouldn't have had like as much of time to grow and scale. And then, in terms of coaching, it's interesting because, again, we're not experts, but we are, providing coaching and mentorship to these digital health startups. So I think for us, it's more general coaching on like, weighing decisions and how to scale like the software side of the business, for example. So with TimeDoc, for example, they were considering whether they should continue really focusing on the chronic care management aspect of the business or expanding to other areas, and when was the right timing to expand to other areas. And then there was a lot of discussion around focusing on scaling out the pure software aspect of the business or continuing to focus on the tech-enabled side of the business. So there's like those types of decisions that are kind of like weighing the pros and cons, that we can bring our experience from what other software startups that we've helped scale and apply them to TimeDoc, and then rely on, industry specific experts to kind of call BS if it doesn't apply to healthcare, but we can at least, provide the lessons from just, more generalized software scaling lessons. And then sometimes leadership and coaching to startups just comes in the form of like taking a bet and being the first one there. So for Manatee, we led their investment round, and and there were several industry specific funds that participated in the round, but all of them were waiting for what's called like a lead investor, someone who comes in and sets the terms of the round and kind of makes the round happen. So being that first fund to kind of take a leap of faith is another way to have impact on these startups.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think again, that's super interesting. I mean, I guess if I was an investor sort of sitting here listening to you, I'd kind of want to know if you're interested in my product. So is there any sort of particular areas that interests you specifically, or you're seeing a lot of kind of, businesses within a particular field that you think, yeah, we definitely want to hear from businesses like that? That's quite a broad question, I know.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, I think we're generally pretty open-minded for anything in the kind of B2B digital health space. But recently, we've kind of been looking at a few spaces. So Manatee was kind of our first foray into behavioral health, and that's a space we continue to explore. I think $800 billion or something like that is spent globally treating mental health conditions. And with COVID and everyone under all these stresses, like it's only a space that's going to continue to grow, and people are going to realize more than ever that mental health is so critical. So I think we're definitely watching this space really closely. And on the other side, like you see employers with work from home are going to be incentivized to figure out how to keep their employees happy more than ever, because like how do you retain employees when they're under more stress than ever before? So I think that'll be something pretty interesting to watch. And then another space that we're looking at is kind of digital, like, how I mentioned, like, there's so many digital health apps, right? And one new space that's kind of solving for or could break through the noise is digital therapeutics. So these are software treatments that have gone, like digital health apps that have been clinically proven to work. So they go through the same FDA process as drugs, or really as medical devices do. And once they've gone through that process, a doctor can literally prescribe you an app as a treatment. So one thing that made the news recently was Achilles Therapeutics recently got a video game approved as a treatment for ADHD, which is so cool, right? Like we have, no one likes giving, kids Ritalin and Adderall and all that. And how cool would it be to just treat ADHD with like a video game? So I think that's really exciting. And it kind of solves for the skepticism that exists in the space around, do any of these apps really work, by, these things having gone through clinical trials. But before, mass adoption of digital therapeutics can take off, there's a lot of distribution and adoption related challenges. So like when you prescribe an app versus prescribe a medicine, there's a way different process, right? Like you have to literally onboard someone to prescribe an app, and then the doctor now has to make sense of the data feed that they're getting, and they don't really have any time to do that. So there's all these different issues to solve for, and you have to convince everyone that these things really work. So I think there'll be interesting technologies that emerge to solve for the distribution and adoption issue. And a couple other areas, like one is anything to do with data and healthcare. Like, I mean, it's always like, it's not a novel point to say that data related to healthcare is interesting, but it's something we're always looking at. So anything to do with like making healthcare systems talk to each other and more interoperable is interesting. And then like you have the shift to value-based care, and in order for providers to feel comfortable taking on risk, they need to have robust patient outcome data to feel confident that they can deliver those patient outcomes. And then relatedly, just, like anything in diagnostics, or just generally like kind of how I mentioned before, like focusing on a niche patient population is interesting. So with respect to diagnostics, like everyone's talking about like precision medicine, but in order to do precision medicine, you need to have precision diagnostics. Like the reason there's so many complications with type 2 diabetes patients, for example, is because there's probably various types of diabetes that we just don't know about, and we just diagnose all of them as type 2 diabetes. So it'll be interesting to see how we get better at diagnosing and then also triaging patients to the right kind of provider. And then kind of already touched on kind of the niche patient populations, but like, hospitals aren't the best like avenue for treating everyone. Like big hospital system is not good at that. So there's like we're seeing all these different specialty clinics for, like, as I mentioned, like GI issues and OCD and bipolar and whatnot, because all these patient populations are so different. And if someone can do and understand the specific patient population really well, they're going to be the best at treating them. So I think just watching that trend is really interesting. And then related to that, just like anyone solving for social determinants of health, so focusing on, like, the various non-health, like direct health things that do affect health, like finances, for example. So there's a lot that we're watching and a lot that we're interested in. There's a lot. There's so much exciting stuff going on in this space.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of the biggest unicorns that they're predicting will come out of the digital health space over the next few years. So they already are. There's huge businesses that are growing, and they're solving a lot more ethical problems than maybe the unicorns of the past. But it's definitely going in the right direction, which is why we're all very interested in this space. But we're pretty much out of time. But in terms, if anyone did want to find out a little bit more information about yourself or the investment portfolio that you've got, what would be the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, they can contact us by email, or we have a website, www.grandvcp.com. That would probably be the best place to start. I think our contact information is there. Yeah, definitely reach out if you're a startup or a founder or investor. We're always, we answer every email, and we take, so always happy to talk.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put the links to that in the summary of the podcast as well. So I'm sure there will be a lot of conversations driving off the back of it. It sounds like you're not shy of a few conversations with all of those spaces anyway, but I think this will do a lot to help clarify with some people that there is some good guys on the other end of the phone, and they can just keep going through the potential rejections that they've had so far, and maybe it'll help them refine and get less rejections in the future as well. So it's really, really interesting. But Rohit, for now, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and feature on the podcast, and I'll let you get on with the good work that you're doing. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Duncan. Really appreciate it.
Cheers. Speak soon. So that's that for this week then, guys. Thank you so much to Rohit for taking the time out of his day to have a chat with me and feature on the podcast. It was obviously really interesting to hear about the US side of things and how it's quite different actually, the investment and venture capital scenario. I've heard a few times about how much more positive investors are in the US versus the UK, which maybe says a lot about our mentality. But Rohit's definitely someone that has a really positive attitude towards the businesses that they partner with and eventually invest in. So I really do encourage anyone that's potentially looking at securing investment in the US to give Rohit, drop him an email, and I've put his details in the summary of the podcast as well. So for now, stay safe, and I'll see you guys next week.